Welcome, everyone. My name is Sharon Engbrecht. I'm a PhD candidate in the English department at the University of British Columbia and the Marketing and Communications Coordinator for Canadian Literature. On behalf of the journal, in particular, our editor, Christine Kim, our managing editor, Donna Chin, and all our staff whose hard work and planning really helped make this event possible, it is my sincere pleasure to welcome you to the second iteration of our Verse Forward poetry reading series, Poetry on the Front Lines. This event began with the hope that we might help create and maintain connections between our various literary communities as we face new and tumultuous challenges. We are thrilled to see everyone here. We would like to acknowledge that the home of Canadian literature and our offices at UBC are on the unceded ancestral and traditional territories of the Musqueam people. We would like to express our gratitude to these nations and communities for the generosity that makes all the work that we undertake possible. Verse Forward, Poetry on the Front Lines, in many ways is the brainchild of our poetry editor, Phinder Dulai, and part of our CanLit Poets project. In a moment, I'll pass the mic over to Phinder, who will be our MC for the evening, and will introduce you to our powerhouse lineup of poets we're honored to have speaking here tonight. Now, I am pleased to introduce Phinder Dulai. He is the author of Dream Arteries, Basmati Brown, and Ragas from the Peripheries, or Periphery. A consulting editor and member of the Talon Books Poetry Board, Phinder is also a co-founder of the interdisciplinary contemporary arts group south of Fraser, InterArts Collective, and currently serves as a poetry editor here at Canadian Literature.
I also want to welcome everybody to a wonderful program this evening. I want to thank you for making the time to be here. I'm just going to do an acknowledgement for where I live. So I acknowledge the unceded traditional territories of the Kwantlen, Semiahmoo, and Katzie First Nations. I live in a community called Surrey, and it's in British Columbia. I'm heartened by the cultural and linguistic regeneration work that is happening in all three communities at this time, and feel privileged to be here. So I'm just going to do a quick set of introductions for the three poets. And what we'll do is I'll have an introduction to the poets, and then we'll have a short conversation that will be followed by the respective readings and then a Q&A with the audience. So the first poet that I'm introducing is Larisa Lai. Larissa has written 8 books, including The Tiger Flew and Iron Goddess of Mercy. She's the recipient of the Duggins Novelists Prize, the Lambda Literary Award, and the Astria Award. She holds a Canadian Research Chair at the University of Calgary, where she directs the Insurgent Architects House for Creative Writing. The next reader is Liz Howard. Her debut book, Infinite Citizen of the Shaking Tent, won the 2016 Griffin Poetry Prize. Her second collection, Letters in a Bruised Cosmos, will be out in June from McClelland and Stewart. She is of mixed settler and Anishinaabe heritage, born and raised on the Treaty 9 territory in North Ontario, and she currently lives in Toronto. And finally, we have Canisia Lubrin, who is a writer, critic, editor, and professor with work appearing or forthcoming in Poetry London, Brick, Jewish Currents, Poets.org, Poetry, Rumpus, and the Yale Review. Her books are Voodoo Hypothesis and The Disgraphist, which won the 2021 OCM Bocas Prize for Caribbean Poetry, as well as the 2021 Wyndham Campbell Prize for Poetry, and is also nominated for this year's Griffin Poetry Award, as well as the Governor General's Award for Poetry. So those are the 3 authors that we have. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to just open it up for a conversation. I'm going to ask, I guess my first question is for Larissa. Larissa, I just wanted to get a sense of your work. It's an evocative collection that explores the themes of colonialism and race as it relates to history and political struggles from Hong Kong to British Columbia. You've written 64 fragments from each, and with each fragment there's a haiku. Can you tell us a little bit about the conceptual framework that this work was kind of developed on, and kind of elaborate a little bit more on that?
Hi, Pinder. Sure. Thanks for inviting me, and thank you for the question. So in terms of conceptual elements, I mean, there's a number of things going on in this book. You're right, content-wise. I'm thinking about, you know, my roots in Hong Kong. I'm thinking about the Japanese occupation of Hong Kong during the Second World War, and of course, I'm thinking about the troubles that that place is going through in the present moment. Other things on my mind, you know, here on Turtle Island, north of the 49th, the dumpster fire has been burning for a while, and my feeling, you know, is that the fire, the idea of the fire, is a symptom of a broad range of unresolved contradictions in our literary culture, in our relationships, complex relationships with one another across um, vast fields of not just difference, but also injustice. And so those are some of the things I'm thinking about in terms of content. I'm not one of these sort of high formalist people who think that content doesn't matter. This book has content. That said, the structure of the content is quite curious, as the term conceptual might seem to recognize. You know, part of the struggle, I think, with dealing with this, not just dealing with, it's about living through a range of complex and complicated things for which I don't have sensical language. And so the origins of this book are, you know, in a moment of kind of heightened emotion, a bunch of language just kind of began to come. I wasn't even sure if it was a poem, Pinder, when it first came. It was just this rush of language. It wasn't sensical. It just came like as though a tap opened and all this stuff began to flow out. And it took me a while to figure out even what it was. And then to decide that it might be poetry. And then indeed, if it was poetry, how I might share it with other humans who inhabit language in ways that might work for them. So I was aware of its sort of ranting quality quite early on. And I think kind of formally, structurally, the rant is probably its earliest formation. My good friend Dina Al-Qasim had a book on the rant. And another dear friend, Rita Wong, also has a series of rants in her book, Forage. So that was on my mind as a, you know, as a form. But the rant was ranting, and it really ranted and it roared, and like a true Newfoundlander, right? And it really rolled in ways that actually were very difficult to read, kind of in the pure form that came out. And so I had another breakthrough, kind of fairly far in the game, when I already had, you know, like a goodly chunk of language on retreat with Dina Metzger and my good friend Monica Gagnon, and the form of the Haibun. Actually, it was before that. I'd been thinking of the Haibun before that because of Fred, because of the mother-father Haibun, Fred's mother-father Haibun, and realized that that was a form that I could take up that would function as a way to hold the more kind of rolling aspects of the poetry, and then with a little haiku that functioned as closures, as ways of clinching. Am I talking too long, or were you hoping for a slightly shorter?
No, it's fine. I think that you're exploring quite important themes. So please.
Maybe I'll just stop there to give you a chance to
Sure.
talk to the other folks.
Okay, that's great. So I'm just thinking about the rant and really how so much of initial writing is kind of a flush of writing, and it can be construed as a rant-based writing, and especially when it comes to writers of color and the kind of themes that we're dealing with and we're kind of exploring. I'm just wondering, Canisia, what your thoughts are in terms of your writing process and how that begins for you in working with a collection of poetry.
Well, first, thank you, Pinder, and everyone at Canadian Literature and Verse Forward, Liz, Larissa, lovely to be here with you all. My process, I don't know that I have a process or a single process. I think I'm guided by the impulses of the work. And so that might lead me to different places and to different iterations of what a process even is, you know. This book certainly has its roots in the earliest years of my life. Did I know that before? No. You know, it's only now at this with this sort of vantage, the vantage of retrospect. Can I see how these networks and those roots are sort of led to this thing that is now entangled in this weird book called The Disgraphist. So, you know, I suppose on a conceptual level, I have always had quite a lot of trouble with the sort of social categories that are attached to um, primarily girlhood. If I go all the way back, you know, it was really, you know, being born into a certain culture at a certain time in the early 80s, where people would still be very bold to tell you what you can and can't do because you're a girl. Um, and so, you know, those were some of my very early formative experiences of, you know, those things that seem to be uh, codified as a social norm, but to me, they seemed really absurd. Um, and I'm sure I'm not alone in that, right? But I was born in a space which is highly polyphonic. St. Lucia is a bilingual country in the Eastern Caribbean. We have the French Creole and English um, languages, and Creole is a kind of admixture of local indigenous languages and French and English, you know, that sort of métissage that formed during the transatlantic slave trade. Um, and so when I came to language with any awareness of something called poetry, um, and this is, you know, later on in my undergraduate studies, I had a lot of difficulty inhabiting the lyric I. I always felt it false. I felt it really egologic. And I was never ever comfortable deploying it. So I just avoided it for a very long time until I got to Dion Brand's poetry class. Uh, and maybe three-quarter ways through the semester, she said, Canisia, where's your I poem? I have not seen an I poem from you this whole while. And so I never forgot that. So that is the impulse for the, you know, that question, you know, kind of stuck with me. And so I went back to that question, and I thought there are more philosophical and ontological things and epistemic things happening at the base of this, right? If I am to take the sort of European conception of the lyric as that singular voice with a certain hierarchic authority on perception, on beauty, on sound, then I can start to trouble some things, right? And so when I met with Christina Sharp's conception of dysgraphia in the wake on Blackness and Being, which she theorizes that post-transatlantic slavery, what has happened with the narratives that are promulgated through the media that are attached to Black people, the sort of reduction to pathology and criminology, and how those things sort of replicate rapidly. She calls that a kind of dysgraphia. And I felt, that was an interesting metaphoric jump off point for me to investigate my own distrust of the lyric I and looking at modernist conception of the individual and why that I felt so deeply troubled by that thing, which I didn't see a lot of critical engagement with in my own studies. And so I followed that impulse, and then I had a couple poems that I had written as as commissions, standalone commissions. And then I went back to them, put them together side by side, and I saw this thing taking shape. And then there was Dion Brand's voice in the back of my head, where's your eye? Where's your eye? And so that's the kind of process, if you want to call it that.
That's quite the layered process for sure. And
Yeah.
certainly it speaks to the experience that we have as writers of color, that we have disjunctures and also non-linear ways of looking at language and looking at how we're inspired by language. I'm just going to move over to Liz here. And Liz, I'm just thinking about your collection of poetry. And one thing that I'm kind of thinking about is the use of the, and as Canisia said, the métissage idea of confessional autobiography, scientific referencing, and indigenous knowledge. And I just wonder if you can maybe speak to that a little bit for us as part of your response.
I will just sort of jump off a little bit from what Canisia was speaking about, because how I wanted to begin to answer a question like this really goes back to an experience that I had in the same poetry workshop with Dion Brand that I was with Canisia. And there are so many things that she taught, spoke of, and conveyed that have stuck with me. But something that very much stuck with me and reemerged in my mind when I was trying to write this second book was something that she said to the effect of, with each new book, she is always trying to bring forward the concerns of the previous book that she feels did not get their sort of full exploration, and sort of bringing that into the new work. And for myself, that was questions around address, intimacy, and sort of a story narrative, and quote unquote accessibility. Because I am very much open to all of the feedback and sort of varied, critic of my first book that I've received over the years. And it was somewhat, I don't know, did it bother me? It was sort of troublesome, thinking that so much of my work seemed so inaccessible, relying too much on this sort of frenetic intermixture of different kinds of scientific language with, pseudo-lyrical, sensibility. That I thought, well, why not write directly about some of my personal experiences? And some of that came about quite organically, as over the past, several years, very large events have occurred in my life that kind of necessitated writing as a way to get through it. But also, I can't deny my own proclivities, and I'm still interested in science and scientific rhetoric and how it's used, but to go about using it in a way that it's kind of queered or defamiliarized. And so in this book, I was interested in how I could weave together different scientific explanation, like Western scientific explanations around cosmological phenomenon and the origin and fate of the universe, and also how the brain itself operates, and specifically, some of its its perturbations or sort of unruliness under conditions of strife or trauma or oppression, right? And the main sort of thread that I found through all of this was getting myself very much acquainted with and attuned with Anishinaabe or Ojibwe star knowledge. And that seemed to be what I discovered to be the true connecting thread through all of those different impulses or gestures or desires in my writing.
Well, thank you for that. It was quite beautiful response.
Thank you. Thank you for the lovely question.
Yeah. So I'm just thinking that there's been quite a few different kind of things that have been brought up. The act of weaving different elements of writing and different elements of ideas together. I'm just going to go back to you, Larissa, in terms of what your process is for interweaving ideas and how that kind of comes to the page for you.
My process around the interweaving of ideas varies from project to project, but I'd say for this one, curiously, this one's hinged on rhyme.
Mm-hmm.
So that was what the initial sort of the impulse of this work. I started hearing language it wanted to turn, and the turning post seems to be in pretty much, I don't know, it'll be interesting. I haven't gone through it sort of systematically to see what I've done, but the ear is open for rhyme, and it's using rhyme as a place on which to turn thought. So one of the things that I'm carrying with me, I'm one of these sort of Trudeau era super assimilated Chinese Canadians, but my parents are Hong Kong Chinese. I can hear a fair bit of the language, although, my spoken language is really appallingly poor and embarrassing. But it's a language that that turns on, it's monosyllabic. So most words, they're single syllable, or else they're combinations of single syllable concepts. And it's a language that's full of puns. And there was a long stretch where I refused to use the pun because I thought it was really, really cheesy. And then there was a moment actually in the project that became Civil Unrest when I was working with Rita, who of course also speaks much better than I do, speaks Cantonese. And we just started punning with one another. It was a thing, like this sort of kooky sisterly thing that just began to happen. And I began to recognize its possibilities. And so I think that, the practice of the pun has kind of returned. It's my way of speaking Cantonese in English. And through the sound of the language and the work of rhyme, I turn ideas, and I try to just listen for whatever language is arriving. And if thought that's semical or sensical or semi-sensical kind of comes gliding through there, then I let it until it hits another moment where it wants to rhyme. The rhyme sort of seems to be the place, where the directions turn, and you get that sense of a kind of, sure, a weaving or a turning or an intermeshing. So, I'm really interested in this sort of, what's the word for that? The polyvocality of language that, it's, is that the right word? It's possibilities for multiple meaning. And the more meanings are kind of falling out of the hat at the same time, the more entertained I am or disturbed or something. And the more possibility for more. And it's very generative, which is why there's so much language in there.
Yeah. Yeah, and you use consonant usages quite a bit in your work, so that builds the rhyme in terms of the work itself. Well, thank you so much for that wonderful, eloquent response to the question. Canisia, I was just wondering if you could speak a little bit more about the uses of the pronoun I in your work in this graphist, and how you came to that pronoun being spliced into 3 different voices.
Thank you for the question. But before I get into that, I just want to, I guess, just big up Larissa for so clearly articulating what I found so remarkable about Iron Goddess of Mercy. That the way that you enact a really precise kind of polysemy, that several meanings happening, and the velocity of the meanings It's really just stunning. I really enjoyed that, and the rhyme, people tend to turn our noses up at rhyme as though, right? But I'm a child of hip hop, so bring the rhyme on anytime. So, but I love that. So, so going back to the I, then Phinder, you know, in the Caribbean, and I keep going back to the Caribbean because that is where the book makes its most kind of sense. Its most uh, its deepest wells of sense or unsense is in the sort of experimentations of Caribbean creolization. And so we have this saying that it goes, maybe it's most familiar in the sort of sonic um, space of Jamaican patois, but we say we are an I and I people, I and I. So it's never just a single voice, even when what can be seen or construed as a single voice arrives, it does so through a kind of collective, right? And so culturally, the kind of deep cultural mores of that suffuses the dysgraphist. But what I was doing, because again, putting pressure on that, where is your I, Canisia? And because Canisia distrusts the lyric I so much, Canisia had to find different ways to sort of contort through the difficulty of having to inhabit the I, right? And so I'm not exactly sure when it occurred to me to split the address into the dramatis personae that I ended up with: the first person, second person, and third person. But that, I think, came about through the opacity of the I itself, because I think ultimately the epiphany that I arrived at is the fact of the self. Um, the fact of the self itself uh, is opaque. What I'm pushing back against, what I find really uncomfortable and false, are the things that we tend to refer to as transparent or accessible within the self. And these things have everything to do with reducing people to, these sites of production and efficiency and capital, these things that can be capitalized upon. And so I wanted to spend most of the sort of psychological space of the poem in that other space, the more opaque space of the self, right? The stuff that might escape language altogether. And so how do I reach for a kind of approximation of language for that thing, the gesture to the deeper things that are unknown, And so the central question becomes, what if really the things that will cause a kind of deep, lasting kinship beyond the performative, what if those are the things we actually don't understand? And so if it is about understanding, how does one arrive there? Because if it is a thing if it is a thing that somehow escapes our attention because of the world we have, the way the world is structured to make these things really opaque, how does one even arrive at that? And so it was an attempt to exceed the limitations of these definitions of identity and of the self and of personhood that we are sort of conditioned to accept without any criticality, right? And so that's how I ended up splitting the I. So if I treated the syntax of the first person I like I would the syntax of the second person I or the third person I, then what kind of sense do I arrive at? That kind of stuff. And I did not want to disavow the difficulty of that in the process. I did not want to necessarily reduce what I arrived at to a kind of clarity that brings us back to single meaning, right? And so I was constantly sort of having to reconfigure the syntax and reconfigure the perspectives as I went through. So the process is really one of revision, of endless revision and recycling and re-envisioning even, because a lot of repetition is happening through each act that is bringing the various iterations of that I throughout the poem.
Wow, that's brilliant. Thank you so much for talking about the I in so many different permutations and senses of how we locate ourselves in both the world and also in terms of how we are in terms of our community. So I'm just looking at time here, and I'm just thinking that maybe we need to probably move on to the reading portion. So I will ask Larissa to take the floor and read some of your poems from your brilliant book.
Thank you, Phinder. And thank you for that just now, Canisia. That's so thoughtful. I really like this idea of the opaqueness, the opaque space of the self, as a site where kinships get built. That's, yeah, really thoughtful, helpful. I'm going to read six little fragments from Iron Goddess of Mercy. So I said they're structured as haibun. I didn't say what that was, but it's a form of travel writing in which there's sort of a long block of text. Traditionally, that would describe the goings on of the traveler's day, clinched off with haiku. The kind of travel happening here is not the kind you would expect, but the structure is there. So you might listen for 6 sort of whirls of language, and each one closed off with a little haiku. And I'll tell you the numbers. I'm kind of going to roam through the book. 1, dear Maynard, meet me halfway at the crossroads where we played touch footsie, our pedicures glistening bright in the moonlight. Dear Monad, when you were my one and homely, we aired our uglies to ducklings wet as greenbacks aching for a border crossing. Dear Mina, parroting the last politic, dear Miner, I'm digging deep for gold, for diamond dust, asbestos, my best friend's girl. Dear Mooney, hugging the cult of the belt, the bat, the bear, and the bull, full of it, Sully, my gully, the gray bird rat of the sky, screams, dreaming of gullible burgers, as the market door swings open to the gray and rainy. Dear Kool-Aid, dear Gut Rot, dear Deadhead singing Where Have All the Flowers Gone? Dear Dust Bowl, dear Shanghai Shek, dear Shrek, your smile green, your antennae scan the skies of our distant early warning line. Dear Monster Mash, tear me to shredded chicken, I'm so hungry I could cry. Dear Morning Has Broken, dear Token, my best friend's one and only, dear Mayhem, dear Mooney, howl at it while your vocals stoical, while the chord of your sword still sharp and dark as a Clark's inkling, recording rust and rebar, tea and totals. Dear Moaner, parroting the harp seal and munching flipper pie. Dear Mailman, staking your hot plot, digging deeper where the white man's dug before. I've been working on the stale road, haunting the crossroad, where we burnt ghost money, smoking the stairway to heaving boulders rolled from mountains, dynamiting our break on through to the other's mother, the love of my light flight, blasting a rocket ship to Venus. Dear Dolly, gosh golly, implicated in the hog's holly, clearing brush for democracy's propolis, staging the metro's underground for undocumented crossings, while the bees buzz around your head till you can't think straight, and they're measuring your cranium, digging deeper than down for the black gold to bomb your ass to kingdom kumquat, or some young guy, the vegetables of my digital LAN, thirsty as a burst oil pipe, Skyping me in. Seek peace, find labor, buzzing around windsocks, empty hive. Oh, this is unlucky number 13, very lucky number 13. Dear white lady with rights to footsteps, dear board, dear neighbor, it's really too late to have guests over. Dear teacher, dear parking meter, lock me in my box and make me quiet, make me compliant to the game of another one down and another one down. Dear co-opted co-op, dear chicken coop, Take the space, but don't move in it. Don't you know the rules are for you and only you, looping me into the purity of my ideals? Dear done and dusted, dear rust, dear pus, a pox on you for learning me your harangue as rush and gush of mother tongue lost in translation, God's your own father, and you're back in grade 2. Stay out of the circle or come over, but you're not allowed in the house. Dear carpet, dear underlay, durian and the curse of purses, dear witches, dear cancer, I know your girlfriend is living there. Dear scrutiny, dear mutiny, we have our reasons, but it's never the one we'll give. Dear workshop, sometimes there are casualties in co-ops, on campuses, on buses, in courtrooms, and this time it's you. Sorry, so sorry, oh golly, Susie, here's a fortune cookie for your trouble. Dear departmental compartment, dear representation, dear committee, dear museum that already knows all about it, dear Buddhist begging Shirley to accept that the white man won, dear what kind of psychology does your trauma belong to, dear don't speak until the guests are gone, dear curb your anger and we'll throw you crumbs, the guff of it, enough of it, dear holy brother parsing proximity to the Father, my place on the ladder most definitely beneath his, dear fucker, my precious pornographer, lining Asian girls up before the philosophers to test the quality of their underwear. Dear judgment, hoarding the plunder and asking me to prove my worth. Dear Duckworth, dear Hogwart, the harm of the charm smokes the girth of the curse I left so you'll never sleep. In high, damp summer, Donald's puts out glowing bins, peaches, fragile, sweet. This is number 17. Dear meat monster, I want my money back. No denying the eternal return of desire for passport, house, boots, and fruits. I longed for a rival. I wanted my innocence and eat it too with XO sauce in broth or fried in hot oil, crunchy tender as baby octopus, beef tendon, the slippery lick of jellyfish on a platter of cold meats. I'm beat. The Christian lean we gleaned to crack the pepper of the emperor's absolute power has backfired. I'm a hoser, a poser, stuck in the loop of the wannabe buzzing around an empty hive. What 5 to get high with, sigh with, hung out to dry with? I'm afraid of what I feel. The affect of the man zips through me fast and neurotic as my myopics ontic. I'm gutted by the flutter of ugly feelings. I reel, I congeal, so sorry, but sorry's castle has already been co-opted by the state and capitalized as stable economy. My astronomy swings from the star machine I wish would rust and turn to dust or butter toast. A roast for the ghosts crowding doorways without papers, bleeding from the body and beyond. I return my clean uniform eternally for the grisly bits, the love, the responsibility. My lineage knows the chop suey of invention, the few dishes for many, extended by rice in rich times and water in lean. I welcome the dirt as long as the water's kept clean. What am I suturing? I dream my grandmother sewing the garment to fit the body, unhooking, restitching through growth spurts and wounds. I'm wound, bound to the bodhisattva of go and flow, the double affect of the go-between, haptic as happenstance reckoning with history, as reports from deep time roll tectonic and earth waves shower me with truth's debris. This bicycle is not a wheelbarrow legislating backyard chickens. 28. Dear Saint Iris, facing the virus of where I couldn't look, my reflection's bloody glare, death bright and mutilated in the light of red sun violence. I'm silent, though it protects me not a whit. Don't quit. You haunt my monster, clamoring in her cage of rage, my holy Asian kettled by the head of the baby, hooked on the imperial bayonet, blood streaming from eye sockets floats Cheshire grin, thin and mad as grief on a stick, fog memory dense as flesh. Dear apocalypse, how of 1,000 yellow bodies blasted up in the dirt as a sign of drugged out American madness. I quiver, water ghost of the same river Kwai, riding the back of the world snake, earthquake rumble of our fracked and finite future. Dear Fishmonger, the war was only cold for the white man, alt-right in tight pants, never acknowledging the cost of greed, guaranteeing our safety pin only after gorging on our hunger. Dear Gorgon, how love slips away on duty's back, scales not for just us, prove first your superhuman intention, only for attendance of the full subjective table, able-bodied and labeled already, the red tape of exception stands you up for a fight. Dear Protestant, send me to a contest I was never with or against. My taint plays polo on a different plane. We chain daisies, awake at the iron dock, waiting for the shipping lane to shunt my interchangeable container, sing in English to the changeling, foxing her wily way out of here, only to get boxed anew. Am I safe in my iron box? Air's thin as plot thickens, sticking the knife in, and I twist wriggle against the regulations designed to keep me from the corridors where the real decisions are made as to who's played for the chance to dance the next ring, float like Madame Butterfly, dreaming she's a man, a ham, a can of Spam, or some other brother howling grief and rage to the false sage who's already turned their back. Duck the dialectic before trolls call you chicken. So much batter under the bridge. This is number 51. Dear Oolong, if there were no such thing as tea, none of this would have happened. Bone, gukbo, hangpin, longching, or tikunyam. I hum, infusions a solution to remaining alert to irony, as sleepers puff opium, trading the doozy of drowsiness for the carrot of charity, draining the Oort cloud of our distant origins. Alert in the iron box, Tempest teases schoolyard bullies flipping their hair like Farah. Mine's too flat to feather. Birds gather in conferences, unable to backcomb for the stand-up comedian or punk rock pork hawk. My dialect ditzes for the fetal leaf, unfurling in hot water as English breakfast, Russian caravan, Prince of Wales or Earl and Lady Grey. I hack for smack, heroin, morphine, or crack, as Jardine Matheson plies the China trade, pirating porcelain, silk, cotton, and tea, items of use traded for the inducement of rest. That's okay. I'll dream my way back into your loving arms race, Cold War or trade war, parading handbags from Prada, Coach, and Chanel as students toss Molotov cocktails against tear gas on the MTR. Our scars glisten bright as stars fishing for birds in the silver river, a sliver of memory flashing light on our addictions enforced by gunboat diplomacy, while geomancers crack ox scapula for a route out of psychic unrest. What metal could test this, gunpowder, green, or iron goddess, as my fireworks go up in smoke? I poke for a new Berlin, find a cross on the road as fentanyl crisis boom echoes across centuries of artificial sleep. Perturbed galaxy ejects, tidal stream of stars, river jumps fish. Now close with the last one, except for that there's some extra that follows. But so this is fragment 64. Dear Tao, old rotary, turtle shells squeal whistling in flames to name the hell of a revolutionary god. I split my cod, debone at spine to line a whispered history. Astronauts, impossible labor climbs back down millennia, returns to Earth. The E of Qing blusters to Shang ancestry, priestess geomancer of a bad romance. I'll take a chance on democracy from below, glowing in the slow heat of another ember. Guilt shines beneath quilts of magpies flashing shimmery feathers as Protestant lies down on her bed of nails, dials dialectic for that long distance feeling, beguiled by the gush of blood staining the shroud of her own making. What king could ding this, Melt dragons in cauldrons to brew a better soup. I stoop, regroup, loop Yue for Tinhao, Gunyam for ocean goers, Avalokiteshvara of the long march across deserts, Bodhisattva, water, Queen Mother of a different West, rescues father and brothers from massive sea to sky storm. Now her incense coil burns above, snakes from ceiling of wet temple, steps from station of the cross. We were not yet Chinese when Shang was ancient. I dream my being returned to Weaver's once and future North Star. Dear Tongyun, I pilot my ship on South China Sea, blink my split toenail, cast net for wishes, bungle my smuggle for a pot of rice steamed with salted fish. Echo wagers cap against standard, cues pool table to return love's body in remembered alphabets lunar pull. Thanks so much for listening.
Wow, that was beautiful. Brilliant. Thank you so much, Larissa. So our next speaker is Liz Howard. So Liz, it's your turn to take the floor and be able to share some of your work from your new book.
Great. Thank you, Phinder. Thank you so much, Larissa. That was just absolutely gorgeous. I haven't gotten my hands on a copy of Iron Goddess of Mercy yet, but I will shortly. Have to like make a huge order through one of the bookstores here in Toronto.
I'll send you one, Liz. I'll send you one.
Oh, great. We could trade.
Yes.
We could do a trade. Okay, amazing. And I'm also very honored to read with both you and Canisia this evening. And I'll just read, a series of, a selection of poems from the new book. And I'll start with a poem called Settler Anishinaabe Noli Turbare. Beauty is my irreparable eye, and today I became geometric. A faux linear figure that distills a skipped trace of first principles. In a whiteout of Atlantic snow, banging stars into the ephemeral vein of Euclid, while rows of lavender circuits, all porous, surrounded me. I genuflected before the hospital parking lot of my father's jaundice, for I am a good daughter of the colony which begot the immortal heart of the markets. Resources nursed all young bucks of the florids. A liquidity I should service or else receive a lesser dessert. With my smudge cleanse at the ready, I find myself dispensing with the usual future haunt of resilience. A survival signaling my relationship to time, or am I out of it entirely? Come Polygon and I circumvent the disaster. Do not disturb my circles. Holy I went, holy all around my head, the holy I am went careening down the back stairs of this low-rise rental, striated by the pinnacle light of this city that has my blood pooled purple at the center of its gravity. You can scan the ground from overhead for death pits. I read this on the internet when I was dehydrated, lonely, and freed. Office plants became the broad-leafed repositories for my cognition's faded hurt. I've gone and been abominable. A column extended from the top of my head into heaven, at the edges of my system. An Anishinaabeg or Indo-European projection of words my nerves could translate into the crawl space of animal magnetism. White pine verticals send us up as the stomach pumped by filial love. Oh, inconsequent curb of my street, I refuse to kneel. This day like any other, plush pockets of rust about another falsehood of water, a creek that pleads. I've gone and got a blister. That summer, a black bear's muzzle got got coated in shellac from the aerosol can she bit through on my mother's porch at the edge of the forest. For generations ago, my great-grandmother said, "Don't ever shoot a black bear. They are my people. Makwa, Makwa from the North Shore." Before I continue to speak more than this, mortuary sunrise, where I am only just alive. Buju, Anin, hello, today is over. I dream in Gmail. PMS, winter solstice, the hereditary gist of a fractal interior. I buried another yesterday by the back door of this expanding universe just before I dreamt in Gmail. As if all new visions visit digitally. A reply all clé de coeur from Athens, a BCC promoted punk tour streamed via a cave system linked to the romantic history with strange quirks, spooky action at a distance. I slid down a snowbank into a northern stream, and then you smiled as if you like me now that my ass is wet. At midnight, that stream became the border between New France and my dream of being intelligible. Then I'm awake in the garage with my firstborn thought, a thought that sublimates into a braid of snowflakes. What could offer me an office and the February pension? A warmth that only makes its way into the deepest pockets. A novice love that can't help but become a flight risk. Spring letter. Wabuz. Tracking through the last of snow. Love is a route I stumble over in search of you. Geese fly Geese fly backwards in my mind. A rewind that a stand of tamaracks sees just perfectly. There is no way to trap the anxious rabbit of me, as my hide also reorders itself inside the brush of wide time. Life cycle of the animal called she. Wife, mother, mistress. I ascended, not through grace, but via debt. A trick of red knew its way all through me. How to cure him of the colic, the bed wet, the conquest, or the lack of consent. I haven't got it in my purse, in my nerve, or in a hospice of milk. A lactic dew stripping the patina from my femurs. Waitress, nurse, whore. Had I another beginning, I'd have taken love down from its shelf and inserted it. The century that flattered me begged also in roses in spring. I am but a sinner, ever retreating. The limits of my language are the limits of my world, and the word was final beyond a reasonable doubt. Maid, maiden, crone. Breaking down before the reliquary age, I have this sense I am between genders in the West End of this dying city. To be a ram bucking in the stars. Did I miscarry the accident? Out on my own release and flaunting recognizance, I palpated the grief, made a mask of all the features that are receding. The bones my dual nature disclosed amid a lawn of cosmos. Birth, marriage, grave. There is an amber-colored skull in the painting called Vanitas that is my son. My son cannot speak because I have no son. I have a brother on the spectrum. He drives a rig hauling metals. He is my brother, but we do not share a father. It is impolite to speak of such things. My headstone could read that I was a creature unafraid to breathe these titles into speech. Address, occupation, age. Subpoena my belief. Love doesn't work here anymore. I lifted my face into distraction. I lifted my hair at its roots, my breasts with wires. When I dreamt the Indian agent, he was the accountant of persuasion. I let down my limbs and replicated. I do not know any other door through which to enter. Castigate my own body in service to the tyranny of will, which is no altar. There is no take away in the forest. Who will be invited to eat and devise a plot of land? Make this mantle disappear. The world is independent of my will. I've said this. Nothing in me can truly pay the lease. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Liz. That was a beautiful reading. And I'm just now paying attention to the stars on your head. Our final reader today is Canisia. She'll be reading from her latest book, Dysphagist. And I'll just hand it over to Canisia.
Thank you, Phinder. I kind of like your lyrics. I might just start calling it the Dysphagist. That's really cool. To follow Liz and Larissa. I will read from Act 6, Ain't I a Madness, elsewhere called Archaeology or Case Closed. Start here, with the stately pronoun again. The needle and thread frantic phone call on the backsides of the years. I could call harvest of birdsong on that corner alone, a madness. Or I could call it the meddled return of 45 minutes, the clinking season of rain. Would you accept this collect call from God knows where? A life now refused in the gutter. Circus flags, a pending republic, ended as the heart should end or arise. In the flash-flooded air, a birthplace answering to unrecognizable versions of elsewhere. When I was young, Jejun gave I the rejected things. Example, the breathable air. Example, the clean sea. Example, the plate with just enough. Example, the craolite. Any room, anyway. Example, the mononuclear I was a sea of graces, not peace or surface. I raged, I gathering sound for the mirror. Jejun. Eventually the trees will rush the river. Inevitably, the houses will blot the map through one cynical night. And what else do the darling tell me anyway? How you walk all these rivers, and is I feeling the shudders of all the caves behind you? Without forcing the point, will you tell the hounds that they too are deeply wounded? Are too a sung-of citizen, wrung out to dry, in the felt-up fields, disunity the blueprint of tanked-up roads? Or call it a decorative cry. Call it the wind jostling the shutters with news of the circus animals. I among them, the pigs, the hen, the cats, trading our father, his language, languish, for the strange freedom of the dog, that in its short speech, it keeps its doggedness a small complaint. Slogans in Heimlich maneuver, Jejun, all of these words are held to idols newly doomed anyway. But let us not lock up this vault just yet. Say the written thing is direct, a line to a nerve, one electric thing to another, perhaps This is why I can say the word love to you, Jejun, and you will point at the mouth and admit there is its primitive ground. But the pointing, the tragedy of ampler things is all around us, and we must pretend this is new every time they camera the vista with laws making new goads about our lives. We are not the sharpened things they make of us, Jejun. Here, drop your one saved day into this one, and let us meet us upright. Have we eaten so many salt preserver pasts, even now, even in the middle of this day? There's no use dumping I into this bay. I who'll bump that track when they come for you too. Will your face write willingly into the air when they are not looking? That you know I've been waiting here at this corner to see you all day. Do they search you for whatever before they make the searching illegal? What about the recipe for Mum's cold roasted kidney? Contraband of hallelujahs, the shave soap she doctored in the kitchen. Good enough and anti-inflammatory aid. Your mother's maiden name. Some abortions. What will they say about the usefulness of their endless killing notations? What now, in this thin hour, have I faded from the miswritten main? So when you call me Jejun, when you call me I'll say A. I will answer. Because to know we are one in the same, to know this much, enough for the nights in which to sleep well, this year, the next. The starving crowd has its talents, wordless corridors famished for love or love's vocabularies, a cosmos never tested in mud, a city in its rust-cultured tapwater, arcades of scrap, the most honest Ed's ever been. Rust, PVC, another whip, another route to poor dreams. Badge it, name it, and just as soon it disappears. A future paid in Caban, watches void of their work of keeping time. A minute schism in the bottle's broken neck. A commerce of annulled records. Trees remembering fruit. The foolish work of asserting a thing. What a hard thing. The freedom that bends the back. In an infinite series, where we approach each other, Jejun forked in some road that might have cropped up anyhow to cross us barely ready. Or were we unaware that we had cracked I to save us, split us three ways, as the centuries that made us possible left us? With all possible comprises, we have this one existence, this so many elsewheres, in others I, and in every elsewhere, us both. And so you have arrived, Jejun, and so I, in a million pictures of our face. And still, I was not myself. I am not myself. Myself resembles something having nothing to do with me, and the idea that I would like a holiday, a whole lifetime from this bend, where I have found my good sense by its reach into my acceptance. Or o mua, tout long cod me boot. How this must end. How dare the undead nerve in my ear that does not behave as its length? It exists to think about the echo one loses as a spaceship elides space shit. We're responsible for the decomposing as the things I call strange, things called mad. We give to no one the shape of the shape of the shape of a thing that light curves over time, length to width to depth, and all of us its information. In the river's swelling urges, nothing drowns, but I sweep the perimeter, drowning in my study of dreams, spent in their ordinary unordinariness, their semblance of the world, their bargain to arrive judged by ended things, old money, new money, public executions, family before brothers, before sisters built as beach forts, before I found blue vines in the trees crisscrossed to swoops, swoops I would lie in and wait for onset, settled in familiar branches, branches with cold fruit, fruit for the shut mouth. How else to honor mothers who claim no hunger in order to feed their children? I would suffer them if my names were big enough, if I practiced hanging upside down, taxonomically, through the world of waking newly through binoculars? How much is that life still worth? All the nickel and diming, when the sweeping vultures are still full vultures, even upside down, even binoculared. Reassembled limb by necessary limb, after mistaking hallucinogenic mushrooms for regular mushrooms, I believe myself read, content for cheerful songs. I am not the first to begin here, in the hard silence of forests, not the first to hear the gnashing of roots into dirt. I have been less full of melody. I hear the birds abandon their branches. I mean to suspend again, hollow and stately as suits. I mean the body a catalogue of bridges, jejune whole towns, the body an abandonment of riches, the body afloat in flight at night, sure of nothing but the pebbled paltriness of daydreams. Here, a parade of haggard selves, in whose hands the machete has found itself the flesh. I walk along something still latent, dark, its embers prone to blaze suns, an ululating mouth here, a whimpering salvation there, passé sapoteurs dragged through the dark. Is this where life can carry over? Is this the breeze through which whole worlds reorder, postpone themselves, in the full speed collision of logic and opinion, the hard contradiction of missing persons, of sterilized smiles in waiting rooms, in every endangered language, and other ways to invent the water, 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 and other ways to invent. Thank you.
Wow, thank you so much, Canisia. That was such an immersive experience as a listener to the poetry. So, so I think at this point, we're going to open it up for Q&A from the audience. I think, Sharon, will you be taking over at this point for a couple of minutes?
I will be asking, yeah, I'll be reading the questions that we have so far, but feel free to put more in the chat for sure. Our first question is a general question. And one of our audience would like to know, how can we more effectively challenge the monopoly of ink that ensures marginalized and diverse voices are excluded from the main discourse?
I can respond a little bit. Thank you very much for the question, Tarek Malik. I think that we're living in a moment where, like, I totally hear the concern. We've been shut out for such a long, long time. And the structure, you know, of the country still remains profoundly colonial, and the place that is there for Black, Indigenous, and Asian people is still limited. I'm not sure that we're actually in a place where we're excluded. I think the difficulty in the present moment is not so much exclusion as perhaps a measure of fetishization. We have places, but I worry that these are tokenized places. I think the ways in which the industry in particular works is such that it's interested in specific kinds of stories and language from racialized people and not others. And you know, we're in a place where the full range of our voices is still not, it's not possible. There's not place for them, and there's not the capacity to hear. I do think there is a little bit, but it's just a little bit. It's really, really narrow. And we need a way to sort of, you know, have the discourse, have the discussion to be much richer than it is. Those would be my initial thoughts. I'm sure Canisia and Liz. And I just want to say, you guys, what a huge honor it is to be here. in this Zoom room with you. I didn't say that earlier, but it's been it's deeply meaningful to me. And I'm so moved by by your work, by your beautiful language, and just your presence. Really happy to share this room with you, and this to be together in the same lifetime.
Yeah.
Thank you so much, Larissa. And I wanna echo that sentiment back to you. And I suppose what's going on in my mind in response to a conversation like that is not so much like what is it that one part of it is what is it that we can do or need to do, right? In order to make things more sort of like quote unquote inclusive within the quote unquote main or major discourse, or the major main conversation. But I think like it is the main conversation, it's very self, right, that needs to be changed. Mm-hmm. And I think it is very much, I think we're very much in this kind of, I don't know, somewhat like a kind of what could be, a kind of a sea change moment where, mm-hmm. because former, like quote unquote marginalized writers are more sort of coming into the fore, and hopefully it is not fully, right, just, a tokenization or fetishization, because there are so many quote unquote, people who are on the margins who are interested in this kind of literature and are so motivated by the kind of like, incredible like creativity, expressivity, excellence, like real true excellence and innovation that is coming out of quote unquote like marginalized writers, right? And secondarily to that, I would say a lot, there has to be structural changes within, the systems itself, the systems of publishing, of like around, and around journalism, around book culture, and also within academic institutions as well, right? Because there is, it's such a privilege, and it does make a difference, at least, in my experience, to have your book taught, and like taken up, in a course, like within a course. But I'm hoping that there are like further, changes within academic systems that are bringing forward individuals who are wanting to kind of bring in different ideas and voices and kind of shake things up, and I don't know how open these pre-existing structures are to those kind of options or interventions or whatever. From what I know, right, there seems to be at least a little bit of a pushback or a resistance to true, deeply systemic change in that regard.
Yeah, those are, I think, quite cogent points. I'm not sure that there's much I can add there, since we are talking about the specific context of what the main discourse is. And I think there's an implied we in that when you say, how can we challenge those prevailing systems that keep marginalized voices out. I think there's something democratizing to technology nowadays that has played a significant role in what is happening, what Liz has called a sea change, and so I think in the most immediate sense, the fact that the internet is available to a lot of people, even though it's still, there's still questions of access around that for a significant number of, or significant percentage of the population. Given the fact that we are in the early 20th century, 2021, that should not be a barrier, but like here we are. So there's these ways of sort of breaking into the sort of extended social practice of literature, and so we don't have to wait for the dominant anything to do anything. And I suppose that is what we've always done. And I go back to that we, I think, which is implied, is that if you're within a group of people who does not have access to the main, then you are sort of positioned in this sort of radical arena where anything is possible. But there's that potential, and then there's actually having resources to put behind growing that kind of thing, So I've often thought about what it would take and what it would mean to have, like a Kave Kanem or a Kundiman or something over here, to really help nourish, and grow and develop marginalized and minoritized writers, and what that would mean for the sort of lasting systemic change that that Liz was gesturing to, and Larissa, and certainly with the review culture being what it is, virtually non-existent. I suppose I've been quite lucky to have my work reviewed quite a lot, and that just tells me, that the thing that appears completely illegible, that doesn't have any kind of recognizable legibility in the sort of dominant space of cultural production and literary engagement and critical engagement, maybe there is room to sort of pry something open, and so there's no easy answer, I don't think, but in a sense, the sort of thinking that's taking shape now is kind of testament to what is already happening. And so maybe to continue that, and not to sound like you're in a fairy tale about it, right? Because they're very real barriers and repercussions for going up against those barriers.
Okay, I believe we have time for one more question. We have Leanne asks, how important is, as Larissa described, the possibility of multiple meaning in a poem? And it sounds like that's for everybody. So how important is the possibility of multiple meaning for your poetry?
Well, I will just say that again, to reference the incredible, comparable Dion Brand. I remember, in this workshop that I took in my MFA, that she very much stressed that every word that, every line or every word or phrase and anything that you're invoking has to mean at least triply, has to be doing at least 3 different jobs. And I loved that. I loved the challenge of it. And I loved the idea of multiplicity of meaning through compression, through a paradoxically compressed openness, something that there's this, like in a what is it like Doctor Who, like the TARDIS, it's larger on the inside. That's a poem, right? That's what a poem is, right? And there's that, and there's that sort of meme that goes around every once in a while of of like of some young child, you know, they were asked to come up with like what is a poem or a definition of a poem, and this one small child wrote a poem is an egg with a horse inside of it, or something to
I love
text,
that.
right? And this is why like poetry is so pleasurable, and that's why, you know, like even though like, you know, like it's just like a little skinny book, but you could, you know, but I hope that if anyone was so inclined, you could read this like a few different times, or even like some of the same poems, and have almost like a different experience every time, right?
Mhm.
I mean that's been my personal experience, and that's what I always loved about poetry since I was young. It was so exciting, you know. It's like an ever shifting, ever evolving building. You know, it's like a labyrinth that, you know, like that keeps shifting, and you never like, you're always arriving somewhere, but how you get there is different, and the place of arrival, or the goal, or the center of the maze is always slightly different. And like how, and there's just so much like just pleasure, like intellectual pleasure, and just pleasure for pleasure, you know, sonic, you know, pleasure for pleasure's sake in that, I would say. Yeah.
For sure.
That was a beautiful answer. Thank you. I would like to say this is probably a great place to bring it to a close. And everyone, I would love you to give a warm round of applause for our poets. It has been such a wonderful evening and such a pleasure to host them. They are phenomenal, just amazing minds, and it's wonderful to listen to all of the insight and to have them read their poetry. We are, yeah, just thank you very much. So that's my internet clap. Thank you very much for joining us. What a wonderful and fantastic conversation and lovely readings. We are very thankful to our poets, Larisa Lai, Liz Howard, and Canisia Lubrin. And thank you to Phinder, of course, for emceeing this lovely event. Also with everyone, along with everyone that made this event possible at Canadian Literature. So once again, we'd like to thank all of our guests and all of the work and effort that went into making this event a reality. And of course, you, our attendees. Without your support, this event wouldn't be possible, and we hope you have a wonderful evening and look forward to seeing you at our next Verse Forward poetry reading. Have a great night.